it's I'm enjoying this music actually. Nice touch.
Thanks all for sticking around for the last session of the day. Hopefully you've been thinking about what questions you'd like to ask Allistair. I'm going to start the session by asking some of my own. When the microphone comes to you, just remember to wait for it. It's not a prop. It does work. If you hold it right up to your mouth, we'll hear you more clearly. But let's start where you started. So you are 25, 25.
Thanks.
Sorry.
That's my age, by the way.
Born in Belfast, Northern Ireland.
Yes.
At the height of the Troubles. Moved to apartheid South Africa with your family.
Yes.
So you're old enough to have lived that.
Yeah.
But probably young enough to have reached maturity at a time when South African sport, coming out of apartheid, was going through a really positive kind of phase.
Yeah.
Thinking particularly the netball team, the rugby union team, the cricket team. Perhaps you could give us some insight into what that culture of sport and achievement was like growing up at that time.
I mean, if you're very familiar with the Australian way of living, it's very similar to South Africa, except we have back in the day there was other challenges that we had. So you're right. I was born in Belfast. 2 days after I was born, the part of the hospital was bombed. It was in the time of the 70s in Northern Ireland, which was very there was a lot of turmoil. Parents took us, me and my three brothers, to South Africa in '81. Obviously, it was apartheid South Africa. I was too young to really understand what was going on. But you start to pick it up later on. I mean, in the 80s, you're in an all-white school. You go to all-white beaches, white churches, white supermarkets, and so on and so forth. So that was indoctrinated in you at a very young. The schooling system as well was under apartheid system as well. And, it was a very tough upbringing, corporal punishment in schools. Every Monday we'd have type of army training as well, because when you're 18, it's a little bit like the Israeli army, where when you're 18, you do 2 years of service in the military. My brothers went. My oldest brother fought in the Angola War. You're straight out of school at 18, you go straight to war. That was back in those days. So, I was very young at the time, but at a very young age, I had a lot of black friends and a lot of friends of color, because I would run and I would be in the track and field team and running team. So I had a lot of black friends, which didn't go down too well at that time in South Africa. So for me, I knew at a very young age, I wanted to be brilliant in something. I wanted to be a world champion in a sport, and probably from the age of 10, I knew I wanted to get out of South Africa. It's a beautiful country, fantastic people, but I just wanted to get out. My dream was to be in the United States of America. So I worked very hard in sports, became South African 5,000 meter champion in juniors, won the 2-time national triathlon championships, and that got me a ticket to get out of South Africa. Now, don't get me wrong, I love South Africa, but I wanted to explore the world. I wanted to become something bigger.
You had a dream to be a tennis player from a young age.
At the beginning to be a tennis player, but like anything else, it becomes very expensive. When you get to a stage in badminton or any sport, you need better coaches. You start to travel. That's where the expenses start to come in. So I gave tennis up because I knew running wouldn't cost much. Even in South Africa, you didn't run in shoes. In school, you ran barefoot. You played rugby barefoot. I was very, very privileged. I must admit that the South African schooling system, sports was a big, big thing. And I played 7-8 sports. So, the weather is great. So it's very much like Australia as well. So, it was a very interesting time. I feel privileged to be brought up in that time as well. Remember Nelson Mandela being released. I remember the '95 Rugby World Cup. I feel proud to work through that, to have been through that.
There's some classic examples from more recent South African sport of the likes of A.B. de Villiers, who I think at school was the 100-metre champion, the 200-metre champion, the 400-metre champion, the cricket captain, the swimming captain. I mean, he did everything. I mean, was he is obviously an exception, but was there a sense that that was the norm, that that was how sport was treated?
Yeah, especially in high school. We had the talent identification one, which was fantastic. South African system as well was, that was another thing. If you were good in sports in school, you would go to a better base for your army. So they would keep the good athletes and not send them to the tougher army bases or to Angola or whatever.
Quite an incentive to run fast then.
Exactly. So my brother played South African rugby under 19s, and we were all like determined to not go to the rough part of the army. So there was always an incentive. You were driven to you'll know a lot of South Africans out there. We're very determined. We're very, I had this work ethic and this attitude at a young age, was that no one will outwork me. I might not be the smartest hamster in the cage. I struggled through school academically, but I just thought no one will outwork me. And at a young age, I realized that attitude and work ethic will get me further. Yeah. So
there's a moment of realization, I suppose, for every aspiring athlete when they realize that those specific dreams that you may have started with are not going to come true, that there is a different path for you, and yours was in coaching. How did that come about? When did that happen for you?
It's funny. I can remember being in the kitchen. I must have been 14, and I was speaking to my mom, and I was crying because I realized that I wasn't going to be a professional tennis player, and I was going to go into running, whatever. And she said to me, "Don't worry, son, you'll probably make a good coach one day." And I said, "Coaching? I don't want to go to coaching. I want to be a professional athlete." And she was right. I eventually became a coach, and it's been the best years of my life. And as I explained today, with staying relevant, there's coaches that are inspiring me that are 85, 90, that are nowhere near finished. So, yeah.
And we talked a lot about your method earlier. If you haven't trademarked the McCaw method, you probably should think about doing that at some point.
All right here.
Some point soon.
Well, I just want to add there that you are a brand. Every single one of you is a brand. And it's important to brand yourself. Your example is your brand. The way you talk is your brand. The way you dress is your brand. The way you conduct yourself on the court is your brand. Your brand is your reputation. We think of a brand as a label and so on. So you might recognize the M. Oh, yeah, that's Allistair's, whatever. But you are a brand. And I think this is what coaches have to realize, is that your reputation is your brand. And it's your most valuable advertising medium that there is your brand.
When did you start to develop that idea that there was a McCaw method? Where were you taking inspiration from?
That's a good question. I've always been very curious. So people ask me about my social media and so on, and they'll say, "Who does that for you?" And I say, "I do it." I'm very curious about marketing. I'm very curious about branding. I'm very curious about social media. I'm very curious about things. And again, I'm not the smartest guy academically, but when you have curiosity, and this is the great thing about great coaches and great athletes, they're very curious. Successful people are very curious. They ask questions. They try to find out why. Today we live in an age where you can find absolutely everything on social media and YouTube and so on. There's no excuse not to find out. You can learn how to fix a car on the internet, not that I'd want to try that, but
one of the videos that I watched of yours on Twitter, you were talking about the importance of a clean dressing room. I don't want any plot spoilers for your talk tomorrow, but there was something sort of almost Jordan Peterson-esque when he talks about when you get up in the morning, make your bed. About having your house in order before you go and try and fix anybody else's. Is that something that you had to train yourself to do, or is that something that's always come naturally to you?
I mean, obviously there was a lot of discipline in my family as well, and on that point in coaching where you have ill-disciplined kids or parents that come to you, I know I'm diverting a little bit here, but parents that come to you and say, my kid doesn't, on the court, they act emotionally, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, all discipline starts in the home. If you're sending your kid to a coach to discipline them, good luck. But all discipline starts in the home. The fact that your kid can't control their emotions, they're a brat, you let them get away with things, starts in the house, that you don't have control. And that's a conversation that is not easy to speak to parents about, but that's where it comes from. But yes, there was always discipline. The schooling system was very disciplined, so I can be grateful for that as well. I believe making your bed in the morning is the most important start to your day, because it's the first act of discipline of the day, and you feel you've achieved something. I mean, there's a great YouTube, I think it's General McRaven, McRaven, he actually has a book called Make Your Bed in the Morning. And it instills the first act of discipline in the day. And actually, it's one of my standards working with young athletes is that they make their bed in the morning. Simple.
One of my standards as a parent as well.
Absolutely.
I don't always succeed.
Yeah, but it's your first act of discipline of the day. I make my bed in the hotel. I even make my bed when I leave the room, because it's not the fact of leaving, it's the fact of doing that chore for myself that makes me think I've achieved something today, now the next thing.
So each day becomes a series of micro achievements, effectively. So you're not dreaming of the bigger goal, in a year's time.
Exactly.
It's achieving small things regularly that pushes you forward.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. A lot of what you've talked about there is the culture in which athletes live. You talked a bit earlier about Klopp. Jurgen Klopp, Liverpool manager. I suppose Pep Guardiola might be a good example if you're really stretching your imagination. Maybe Maurizio Pochettino at Spurs. But do you see the culture of coaches starting to change, and the approach, that authenticity, that trust that Klopp brings outwardly? Are you seeing that permeating football generally, sport?
All sports.
Generally?
All sports. This generation aren't. Generation Z and a little bit of the younger millennials are not responding to autocratic style of leadership. If we look at Jose Mourinho, his last 5 years have been not successful in terms of his standards, and I think he's had to change some things in his personality. I mean, I've been listening to Mourinho in a few interviews the last few months, and I've never heard the word empathy more from him. Mm-hmm. So maybe something's changed there. For example, where he's realized, with Manchester United and with who was before Man U? It was Chelsea, maybe.
Real Madrid.
Real Madrid, where his style of coaching and leadership was no longer working. A very successful coach 10 years ago, but today, not so much. I'm very curious to how he comes back with that. But yes. Today's coach is, we had a quote up there about less ego, which is more, to be honest, more male, has more ego, more facilitating and not dictating is an important one, and empathy. Again, really understanding the other person, emotional intelligence of really understanding that other person. So those are the qualities of great coaches today. Those coaches that are more autocratic, more hardline, they're getting phased out.
Ego, of course, works both ways, because it is a relationship, not just a connection, as you talked about. Do you find athletes in some sports harder to coach than others? Do you find athletes from certain countries harder to, or certain regions harder to coach than others? How do you adapt to those kinds of differences, moving as you do from discipline to discipline?
I've never worked with one successful athlete that was easy. I'm not talking about personality, I'm talking about their standards. Why they are a great athlete is because they have high standards. So successful people are usually difficult to work with. Even though you might see them on TV, oh, what a nice guy or what a nice girl, and they must be so great to work with, and you're like, behind the scenes where they're respectful, they're mannered, but they're demanding. Kevin, who's number 5 in the world, is always asking why. Why? They're very smart as well. Top athletes are very smart, I find. They're very inquisitive, they're curious. If we do something last week and it was, let's just say, 3 sets of 12, and we're doing 3 sets of 10 today, he'll say to me, last week we did 312, why are we doing 310? You got to have an answer. They challenge you. Now, the coach I was 10 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to handle that because I think he's undermining me, he's being cheeky, he's asking questions too much. Now we as coaches have to have the why, because this generation want to know why. Why are we doing this? Why? And they're not being
insubordinate.
They're not being ill-mannered or disrespectful. They really want to know why we're doing this, And some coaches can think that's pretty disrespectful,
Yeah. I'm going to go to Twitter, actually, aptly enough, for the first question. We asked earlier in the week if anybody on Twitter had questions for Allistair. So the first of those is from Kaylee27. And she asks, I'm trying to get a player to just play and not worry and be anxious about outcomes. How do I persuade them to just play? And she capitalizes the last play.
Yeah, there's no easy answer to that. I mean, we all have players like that as well that get lost in the moment. So first of all, they have to understand what choking is or what pressure is. And it's basically choking or what they call freezing is as simple as this. It's not being in the moment. When you're choking, you're either thinking in the past or you're thinking in the future. Example, here we go again. At 9-9, I always do this, or whatever it is, or a tight point, I always do this. That voice comes back. Or thinking in the future, if I lose this point, I'm match point down. If I lose against this girl, all this stuff starts to come in. That's why they get to that place. Process needs to be taught in practice. You just can't tell an athlete in the match, stay in the process. That is something that you have to be on top of that in practice. When you see the player not in the process, tell them. Too many coaches step back and practice and just watch points. They don't watch behaviors. They don't watch where that tight point is or that tight period in the match is where we can address that. You always have to be looking for teachable moments when you coach. Not just in the technical side, the tactical side, but also the mindset side as well, which is important. Even stopping play and saying, what were you thinking there? Just curious, honestly. They might say nothing, or they might say, get your serve in, or whatever it may be. But
we saw Lars do it earlier with one of our athletes.
Yeah.
What should you have been doing? What were you actually thinking in that moment? She was thinking, I want to win this rally. I want to prove a point.
And that's great coaching. Is get into
he saw that.
Yeah, get into the minds of your athletes. I mean, it doesn't have to be all the time. Like, what are you thinking? What are you thinking after every point? But like Lars did there, what were you thinking? That's how we get to those places easier in their heads. Because if we're not asking what's going on in their heads, you're not a mind reader. You can't figure it out. And you don't have to be a mental skills coach or have a certificate in that. You're just basically saying, what are you thinking? At that point, what were you thinking? Okay, good. What would you do next time? Ask good questions. We've got to teach more than coach, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. There is a difference, even though they say teaching is coaching and coaching is teaching. But, we've got to find those teachable moments.
There is, of course, an awful lot of information now available for players to process. And you obviously talk a lot about culture and behaviours. You don't talk a lot about science and data, which, of course, is another aspect of performance analysis that has increased exponentially, and particularly, I would say, in the last 5 to 10 years. How do you keep an athlete's mind clear of those things, but at the same time use the important bits from them to help further their performance?
Yeah, good question, because sports science is obviously something that's very, very big today, and it's not new. Sports science has been really at the forefront for the last, say, 15 years, I'd say. I mean, it's always been. There's been a form of sports science 30 years ago, but I believe sports science has made, now the sports scientists aren't going to like me for this, but I believe sports science has made athletes weaker. It's made them mentally weaker, because obviously sports science is necessary for load production, for recovery, for knowing what's going on in the athlete, but it's also put limits on them. And of course, this is my opinion, but it's put limits on how far they can go. They're getting to a red zone the guys jump in, that's enough. But, in matches and tournaments, you're going to the red zone. How do you deal with that red zone? Or, because you've always been used to you got to recover, got to step back, bring it back down, example. So Alan Pardew, who was the coach of Crystal Palace, which is an English football team, he brought out something a week or two ago about saying that sports science is making the players weaker. Now, we need sports science, I agree. However, are we giving them too much leeway in sports? Are we giving them too much of the say in sports? GPS trackers, they're wired up. Last month I was at Paris Saint-Germain, and I think they have a fantastic team there. I spent 2 days with them, but they have 4 sports scientists with the first team. 4. I mean, that's quite a lot.
I bet you'd all love that kind of budget, wouldn't you? 4 sports scientists.
Yeah.
Per player. One of the other things that athletes are now having to contend with that has moved sport on across the board are law changes, and these are particularly changes in rules and laws that suit broadcasters, particularly, and the marketing side of sport. So thinking about things like shot clocks, for example, shorter forms of the game that change tactics, change approach. I'm sure that T20 cricket, 2020 cricket, is not the first sport to have done that, but people talk about what is our T20 going to be, whether it's 3-on-3 in basketball, whether it's shorter games, whether it's not scoring on any point, not just on your own serve. I mean, there are multitude of different examples. How do you adapt as a coach to those changes in terms of keeping a kind of clear mentality for the players, and what kind of pressure have you noticed that those things add?
Yeah, obviously, I mean, you've got to abide by the rules as a coach. So if they change the shot clock to 20 seconds, like they did in tennis, 25 seconds, you have to abide to that. Now, a player that might have a routine, the best players have routines between points, as we know. Their routine might take a while. So, for example, in tennis, they go get the towel, and this, that, and it's like 40 seconds, and, that's the problem that's come in.
Rafa sending coded messages to the
Russians. That as well. But, I'm just using tennis as an example, but you don't realize that in the Grand Slams, the courts are bigger. The space between the baseline and the back wall. On TV, you don't see it, but the baseline to the back wall is pretty much where I'm sitting right now is the baseline, and the back wall is there. So that's a good 10 meters behind. Mm-hmm. So to me to walk back there to get my towel is 10 seconds. I come back, it's 10 seconds. I bounce 5 times, 30 seconds. You know where I'm going here. That's why they had to bring that in. Golf, I see now, the last 2 or 3 weeks, a lot of complaints by players complaining about slow players.
Bryson DeChambeau being the...
Without mentioning names.
The poster boy for slow play at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. You're up to date with a lot of your sports. I like that.
I do try.
There we go. There's a problem there in golf now where it's just taking too long. It's killing viewership. It's like waiting for this guy to hit the ball. He goes back, he looks at it, he goes back, he looks at it. Switch over to something else. It's necessary. It's necessary. People want to see action. They don't want to just see have to wait 30 seconds until the next point or whatever it may be. So we have to, like I said, we have to adapt to that. You have to have the player prepared for that.
I'm going to go back to Twitter, and then I'm going to open up to the audience here, because I'm conscious that the evening is not slowing down. Ewan Williamson on Twitter wants to know about in-game coaching, specifically looking at an example, let's say, between tennis and badminton. In tennis, it's perhaps not unique, but it's certainly unusual that the coach is not allowed to communicate with the player during play, and you see players look to their box, Novak, Andy, sometimes not happy at the lack of response. Mm-hmm. Other players, Serena being an example, got into trouble for there being too much back and forth between her and the box. In badminton, by contrast, you can coach the player on every point. You have a break mid-game where there's the opportunity to instill some more. Where's the balance? What are tennis players looking for from their box?
It's 50-50. It's 50-50. Some, they're doing it. They have a big issue. They have too many separate rules in that game right now. The women's tour are allowed coaching once a set. The men's coaching aren't allowed it. But honestly, everybody coaches. You're whispering to the player when they're in the corner. Some of them use hand signals. So if I'm, for example, with my hat, I'm maybe saying hit more deeper or whatever it means. We'll do something, scratch the left shoulder, play the backhand. So there's coaching going on all the time, and players want it. So for me, it's a split decision. Some want it, some don't want it. Your old traditionalists will say keep tennis the way it is because they have to think for themselves, and then the new gen will want coaching. So I think there should be coaching, just like there is in squash, just like there is in badminton.
Is it possible to be too intrusive?
Absolutely. I'll be honest with you. I've watched quite a bit of badminton this week, and I observe, I listen, I watch more what's going on with the coach interaction, and in some cases there's too much information.
So what would your advice be in a room full of badminton coaches here? There's what would you say about body language, about how you comport yourself at the side of court in such close proximity to your charge?
Yeah, obviously it's the timing. I mean, you've got to know your athlete. You've got to feel your athlete, where they are mentally, where they are. I never think it's a good idea to give critical advice or tactical advice when they've just lost a point or two in a row. I always think the right timing is when they've maybe won a point where they're feeling a little bit better, or 2 points, and then you bring in that, listen, whatever it may be, step in a little bit more, or get into zone 3 a little bit more, whatever it is. But a player who's going through a frustrated time or whatever, you've got to be very tactical of when you say something. I don't know who it was who mentioned it, but I think it was with the All Blacks as well. Coaches, especially before matches, overload information. A little bit of their emotions are going as well. They overload. The player is ready. In fact, the 10 minutes before a match, I never like to speak to a player because I let them get into their zone, their thinking. You'll find it as well, coaches, and I used to do it. They're 2 minutes before going on, and you're still loading them with something. Hey, remember to do this. No, yeah. I've stopped that. If the preparation is done, they're either ready for the exam or they're not. Mm-hmm. Give them their last I like to give them their last information 20 minutes, 30 minutes before, and it's simple. Maybe 2 things.
Yeah.
My advice to players is always, number 1, play your game. Play to your strengths, number 1. And then number 2, I might give them 1 or 2 things about the opponent. That's it. And then you're lucky in badminton is that you do have the opportunity to sit and adjust 1 or 2 things if you see that player is adapted to that, whatever. But that's it. Just 2 things. I call it in the 7 keys to being a great coach, J2. Just 2. 2 bits of information.
Good.
Yeah.
Lots to digest. I'm going to open up to the floor. We probably have about 10 minutes, I would say, looking at John, thumbs up. Would anybody in the audience like to start us off? I can't have exhausted all the questions.
I'm impressed, though, that they stayed on. So
We've
good
got
job,
one in
guys.
the middle here, one just in the middle here. Wait for the microphone. If you could let us know your name and where you're from, that would be great.
And your bank account, please.
I think yours is better than mine. Bank
I've
account.
got 7 ex-wives, so it's costing me quite a bit. Kidding.
Okay, so my name is Selwa, and I come from France. First of all, I would like to thank you for accepting to be here. Your conference was, speaking for myself, very inspiring on how to become and stay the best coach possible, maybe also the best person possible. Mm-hmm. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
And I would like to ask you how it is about the path that you followed during your career, What made you move from a former successful athlete and newbie coach to a world-renowned performance expert and mindset expert? What is the key to moving from this position to what you are today?
Finding my passion very early of sports, and then obviously helping others get better was something that motivates me, that's my purpose as well. So it was very easy. I always recommend to athletes is that start setting up your career at least 4 years before you finish your career. So it's something that's also mentioned in the book as well. I think it's Champion Minded. It was where I talk about an identity crisis, is that you become, Kim the badminton player or John the golfer or whatever, and they have this difficulty when they come to their end of their career. For me, it was different. I was already setting up my career, my next phase of my life while I was still an athlete. I wasn't being an athlete and then, what am I going to do now? So while I was on the road, I would be doing correspondence studies of sports management and nutrition, and I just try to do as many things as possible of just learning this whole environment as much as I could, and that's how it metamorphosized. Yep.
You mentioned, I think towards the tail end of your presentation, about watching documentaries. You mentioned you had a book list as well. I went to a school in Scotland to address a group of 15-year-olds, which is a thankless task, I can tell you. And it was about career choices, and it was about where people go in life and the decisions you make. And the thing that I came back to right at the end, which is a regret of mine as I look back on what I did in my late teens and through my 20s, was I didn't read enough. And I found since I started reading again, and particularly maybe your books, maybe other people's, those are the places that I draw inspiration for ideas of what might come next, or where or how I could move myself from position A to position B and start thinking of my life as something different than just being a guy who worked at the BBC into somebody that wants to go and be an entrepreneur, and in your case wants to do something different. Do you have what would be on your reading list? What would your desert island library be if you had to take 3 books that could help answer that question?
I always read Slight Edge every year by Jeff Olson. It talks about the 1% every day. I know we've heard that, it's very cliche, but if you're to look at a timeline of January to December and the choices we make, either we're eating healthy, we're exercising, we're doing the right things, and that line curves up, but we don't see it curving up. Contrary to that, we make poor decisions. We sleep in, we have a poor breakfast, or we have no breakfast, we don't exercise, we're eating poorly at night, and that curve starts to go down, but you don't realize it. Just like you can't see yourself every day losing weight or gaining weight. You have a salad for a day, will you see a change? No. You have a salad for a week, will you see a change? Not really. Month, maybe a little. A year, yes. You come back and like, wow, what happened to you? You're looking amazing. But you don't see that. That's how habits are created over days. So the Slight Edge talks about that, of how we don't see things creep up day by day, and then a year's time you see, oh my goodness, it's, what's happened. What other books? How to Win Friends and Influence People, the second most sold book in the world. It's written in 1925, I think it was. A fantastic book, that one as well, where those principles still live today. How to Win Friends and Influence People. If you haven't read that, it's a fantastic book. I just want to go on to the books I wrote. The style changed as well, because I knew this generation, and even my generation, aren't big readers anymore. Because we have so much information to read now on social media and so on, you don't feel like opening a book. Kids today don't feel like reading another book. They're reading in school all the time. So I thought to myself, let me bring out a book that's got chapters no more than 2 pages or 1 page. Little bits of information, chunking information, digest this a little bit. Can you read a page a day? Yeah, you can read a page a day. And that's how I've been able, that's why Champion Minded, especially with kids, has become one of the best sellers, is because you say to them, read a page a day. Can you do that? Yeah, I can do that.
A micro achievement.
Yeah, exactly.
Make a bed, read a page.
Yeah, yeah. It's another thing, like for coaches. They give the kids too much stretches to do afterwards. 12 stretches to do by themselves. Good luck with that. Maybe 20% will do that. If I give my player 4 stretches to do, it's achievable, it's done in 5 minutes, it's better than nothing. You know, when you give a program to a kid that's got 12 stretches and a half an hour warm-up and this and that, you know, there's a 50% chance that's going to get done. So keep it very attainable, you know. It might not be perfect, it might not be stretching everything, but keep it attainable, just 4 stretches.
I hope that's helped answer your question. No? Sir? It's on.
Thank you very much. A wonderful presentation and
Thank
a
you.
discussion. I'm from India. My name is Anil Ramachandran. My question is, you touched upon somewhere where the tennis players follow certain rituals. How important is a ritual for a player in terms of building up his confidence in the game? Should that be something which coaches should look upon individually, very specifically to players, how it can affect the outcome in terms of success?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one of the first things I look at a player is what they're doing between a point, what they're doing around the court, the changeover, whatever. Incredibly important. A lot of good athletes are very superstitious as well. They drink their electrolytes first, then water, snack, towel. They have these like routines which maybe you don't see or notice, but they are part of their system, so to say. But why do we have rituals? Why do we have routines? Is because it helps you calm the mind and not be too much anxious or that's between points. You try to keep it consistent all the time. If you're playing with your strings, you walk to the back of the court, whatever it may be, is that you keep it like that regardless if you're ahead or you're losing. Because you'll find that when players start to lose or they're starting to go down that path, they start to rush. They start to do things that they're not used to. I can always tell when a tennis player or a squash player, and if I watch badminton, I'll pick it up too, is not in the right frame of mind. They either start bouncing the ball 3 times or 6 times instead of 9, whatever it may be. You start to see that they're out of sync. They've lost their routine because they've let their emotions take over. So the best athletes do have rituals, routines to help them stay in a level state of mind. So it's important, very important.
Someone at the front there, while we wait for the microphone. I think it was Jack Nicklaus used to say in golf, if he hit a bad shot, he would tear the Velcro. He said, tear the Velcro on his glove. It would be on his left hand, but I'm holding this in my right. Tear the Velcro on the club as a mental break from the last shot. That was it. That last shot is gone, and he would rip the Velcro in his glove, and then he would reapply his glove before he hit the next shot and start afresh, which I thought was
I mean, an example that I do, for example, is I'll tell a player to go to their towel to wipe away the last point.
Yeah, similar.
So they go to the point, and that's a they don't need the towel because they're not sweating, maybe whatever it may be, but it's a sign that they're wiping away the last point, and when they turn to the court, they're in the next point. Yeah.
Madam, a question.
Hi, it's nice to listen you talk. My name's Yvette. I'm from Switzerland. I agree with you 100% on the 7 key being a great coach. And you mentioned the good coach will have a standard, and also we need to adapt to the new generations. Now every younger ones all want to fast, achieve, and doing less. And also you mentioned that the fundamentals is the key for success for the athletes. So how will you be able to balance it? It's about your own stance and also adapt to the new generations, how to get to the younger kids to buy in, and how important about the fundamentals.
Very good question, because the fundamentals are boring and they're repetitive. to be honest. So for kids it is. However, to master a skill, there has to be a deeper understanding in the fundamentals. You know, we see the brilliance of a Ronaldo, we see the brilliance of a Nicole David or whoever it may be, but underneath all that brilliance is the fundamentals first, and then they add that extra bit on the end. That is the challenge to a coach, is how can you make the fundamentals fun? How can you still teach the fundamentals but keep it interesting and keep it adding diversity but still staying close to the fundamentals, if that makes sense? You know, for example, there has to be incentives in, you know, if you're doing a cross-court drill or you're doing a deep drill or whatever it may be, there has to be incentives of points in that zone or whatever it may be that keeps them engaged in that. They're not just brain dead, just hitting. So there has to be purposeful reason to that. So that's the challenge to a coach, is how do you make the boring interesting? Did that answer your question? No?
I suppose you've embraced social media as one way to help you communicate that. How have you found that experience? Is it?
Well, here's an interesting thing. They did a study with companies in the United States with the Generation Z and the younger millennials. And they find that giving them videos on YouTube of instructional things to do within the company and training courses is easier done on YouTube than it is done in person, because they're a generation that learns from their computer more than being able to sit and listen to an hour of someone talking. So you now find companies investing in people that are making instructional videos, and they find that's being more successful with the kids, young adults as well, as that they're learning from that easier.
Any pitfalls on Twitter yet?
Not that I can think of, no.
Good. Stay on the right side of that. Last question, I think, because we all have homes to go to. Could we get a microphone to this gentleman at the front for the last question?
We can do him as well. We can be quick.
We do two? We do two.
I'll give them Twitter answers.
Let's be Twitter questions, Twitter answers, nice and quick. And a microphone up at the back as well, so we're ready to go.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
My name is David from Singapore. So in coaching and dealing with youths, invariably we have to manage the parents. So any advice or experiences, how do we set boundaries, as you mentioned earlier?
Yep.
And have the parents to understand that they don't come in and become coaches themselves.
Okay, yeah. That's why, in the presentation, 7 keys to being a great coach, number 1, it all starts with your standards. The first line in the 7 keys is all starts with your standards. That's where you set the boundaries, and you have to be clear and you have to be convicted on them. And you have to get the parent to agree to that, because ultimately they are in charge of their kid, for example. And you have to follow that up. If they see they can bend those rules, then they're going to bend those rules, and you're the one that's going to be, coming under the pressure and so on and so forth. Another thing coaches don't do enough is include parents with good communication and what's going on. So, in between classes is not good enough, like a quick 2 minutes, I'm sorry, I'm on to my next player. Mm-hmm. They need to be communicated well. So be it through meetings, once every 3 months, for example, once every quarter, a half an hour meeting. Parents, of course, are busy. There's school, there's kids, there's so on and so forth. So keep it 30 minutes, maybe whatever time which is suitable, but communicate to the parents. It's one thing I think coaches fall short in. The crazy parents are nothing more than parents that just aren't being communicated well enough to. That's what crazy parents are. So you can understand it. When you become a parent, you understand where, you get to understand it a bit better.
Because you've got them that far,
yeah.
And now you're handing over responsibility for the next stage of their development to somebody else.
Yeah.
So it's about expectation management with them from the outset. And it goes back to the things you talked about, being authentic.
Yep.
So they don't think you're full of BS.
Yep.
They can trust you.
Yep.
And that you value the input they've had up to that point.
Yep.
Good question, good answer. Last one, absolutely the last one. Yes, sir.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for everything today. I'm Jerome from Singapore. Just curious, do you think it's essential for a coach to be playing at a higher level than his or her athlete that he's managing in order to be successful? If the answer is no, then what are the key things that you manage to do that? Because, for like say soccer, when the players have controversial tackles and stuff, he will argue, hey, the referee doesn't play at our level. So they have a lot of controversial arguing about this point. So in a coach and athlete view, what's your view for that?
Yeah, I think, no, you don't have to be a great former player to be a great coach. They're two completely different skills. Coaching is a skill set that's learned. It does help in a way to be an ex-player and to also have the skills. That is a bonus to be an ex-player. You do get a level of respect as well from the athlete, knowing that you did something. That's why I always find it's great for coaches to sometimes, this is where insecurity comes in. They don't want to bring anybody else in, but I do this as well. So, for example, I've got a player in the US Open where I've brought in a former top 10 player to mentor him for a week or two at the tournament. So those type of things are good. But no, you don't have to be a great former player to be a great coach. In fact, the soccer clubs I go to, and one at Basel yesterday, I asked him, what level did you play at? One of the head coaches said, no, nothing great, but he's one of the best coaches. So, yeah.
Klopp, Pochettino, Benitez, Mourinho.
Mourinho didn't play a level at all. No. So you don't have to. No.
So there you go. Yay, coaches. Go, coaches.
Yeah.
That's a good note to end on. So the book that we're giving away, Allistair, is 7 Keys to Being a Great Coach. Become your best, and they will too. Now, there was a competition earlier to win this signed copy. Why don't you announce the winner, and we can invite them up to receive
It could be
prize.
A difficult one, so I have got 2 questions in case they don't get the first one. But please know the answer. If you know the answer, put your hand up. Don't all throw up, and then there's guesses. The percentage of people that don't feel appreciated in their jobs. Can you remember what that percentage was? First, the lady there.
40 to 60.
You have to be spot on the number.
On the money, please. We'll give you one last chance. 60.
58? Well done.
Oh, there we go. 58.
Listening
well done,
to
sir.
Yeah. This is a guy that listens to the small details, I tell you. It was a tough question, I know, but...
sweat the small stuff.
Yeah.
Sweat the small stuff. Thank you all very much for your participation and your patience this evening. We ran on a little bit, but I think you'll all agree it was worth it. Once more, could I please ask you to give your appreciation to our speaker, Allistair McCaw.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice job. Thank you.